Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Hannah J. Stolze, the Executive Director of the Wheaton College Center for Faith and Innovation. And I am so excited to be here today on our podcast, Integrate, where we have conversations about the impact of the Christian faith for business leaders in everyday work. And I'm here today hosting our guest, Dr. Gary Chapman. Dr. Chapman is an author, speaker, pastor, and counselor who has a passion for people and helping them form lasting relationships. Chapman is a well-known marriage counselor and director of marriage seminars. The 5 Love Languages is one of Chapman's most popular titles, topping various bestseller charts for years, selling over 20 million copies, and has been on the New York Times best-selling list continuously since 2007. I'm so excited to have Dr. Chapman on with me today, talking about a new book called Love is a Choice, with 28 extraordinary stories of the 5 love languages in action. Dr. Chapman, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Hannah. It's great to be with you.
So wonderful. And I can't believe that Love Languages has been a bestseller since 2007. Not a surprise. Actually, it really helped shape my marriage early on. I'm going on 20 years now. So I'm going to start off by saying thank you. It has been an awesome tool along the way. And I know you talk a lot and write a lot about love. And we use the word and the language of love a lot in everyday life. What's your definition of love? And why do you say it is something we choose?
Well, there are numerous definitions to love, and that's why I say sometimes that it is the most confusing word in our country. As we talk about, I love hot dogs, I love barbecue, I love the mountains, I love the beach, I love my car, I love my dog. And then we say to a special someone, I love you. What's that supposed to mean? But to me, the biblical concept of love is that love begins with an attitude. It's expressed in behavior, and it stimulates positive emotions in the person to whom you're expressing love. And by attitude, I mean that we face life on a daily basis with an attitude that I want to enhance the lives of the people whom I encounter, whether it's at work, at home, close relationships, or rather distant relationships. If we have an attitude of love, there will be numerous opportunities to express love. If I'm thinking I want to enhance the people's lives that I encounter. So that's the attitude with which I focus on love. But I'm not downplaying the emotions, because almost everyone agrees, one of our deepest emotional needs on the human level is to feel loved by the significant people in our lives. If you're married, the person you'd most like to love you is your spouse. If you feel loved by your spouse, life is beautiful. If you feel like they don't love me, they wish they weren't married to me, life can look pretty dark. So, but in our culture, when we think of love, particularly if we think of love between, husband and wife or dating partners and that sort of thing, we think of love as a feeling. We say we fall in love. We have these strong emotional feelings for the other person. And consequently, because we've exalted that as the concept of love, then when that need is not being met and we don't feel love, then we have a tendency to want to bail out. You're not making me happy. I don't love you anymore. And if that's the only concept of love you have, then it explains why people bail out. But if you have the attitude of love, you can be honest to yourself and say, I've lost those euphoric feelings, but with God's help, I'm going to love you. You let me know how I can enrich your life, and I want to do that. And it'll give rebirth to emotions.
Yeah, I love that. And, definitely over years, you have shape and reshape how you love your spouse, how you love family members. And before we jump into, kind of thinking about what love looks like in a workplace, I'd love to explore your model of love and talk about the love languages. What are the 5 languages? And how do we determine our primary language? And why is it important to share it with others?
Yeah. Well, the 5 that I discovered, and I discovered this in counseling couples, where they would sit in my office and one of them would say, I just feel like they don't love me. And the other one would say, I don't understand that. I do this and this and this and this and this. Why would you not feel loved? And I knew they were sincere. I mean, in their mind, they were expressing love, but the other person, it wasn't connecting with them emotionally. And so I really went through several years of my notes and asked myself, if someone said, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what were they complaining about? You know, what did they want? And the answers fell in 5 categories. So they are, and there's no particular order of importance here, but one would be words of affirmation, just, you know, looking at things about them that you can express appreciation for. You know, you look nice in that outfit. I really appreciate what you did. One of the things I really like about you is it's just using words to affirm the person. And then there's acts of service, doing something for the other person that you know they would like for you to do. In a marriage, there would be such things as cooking meals, washing dishes, mowing the grass, walking the dog, changing the baby's diaper. Yeah, that's a big act of service.
True.
You know, there's an old saying, actions speak louder than words. Mm-hmm. If this is their love language, actions will speak louder than words. And then there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. You know, my undergrad degree at Wheaton College was in anthropology, cultural anthropology, the study of cultures. We've studied cultures all over the world. There are no cultures where gift giving is not an expression of love. It's universal. The gift says they were thinking about me. Look what they got for me. Doesn't have to be expensive. We've always said it's the thought that counts, but it's not the thought left in your head. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head. Okay, so gifts. And then there's quality time. Giving the person your undivided attention. You're not multitasking. TV's off, computer's down. You're not answering the phone. You have my full attention. And then number 5 is physical touch. And in a marriage, that's such things as holding hands, kissing, embracing, the sexual part of marriage, arm around the shoulder, driving down the road, you put your hand on their leg, just affirming touches. And the basic concept is that out of the 5, each of us has a primary love language. That is, one speaks more deeply to us emotionally than the other 4. We can receive love in all 5, but if we don't get love in our primary language, chances are we will not feel loved, even though the other person's expressing some of the other languages. How do we discover our love language? Well, there's 3 informal ways. One is ask yourself, how do I normally, just by nature, express love to other people? Whether it's a wife or a husband, or whether it's to a child or to my friends. Like if I'm always giving gifts to people, that's a clue that that's perhaps what I want, because we tend to speak our own love language. Or if I'm always giving people encouraging words, then that may well be my language. So you ask yourself that. And if you're in a close relationship like a marriage, you can ask, or with children, you can observe, you know, how did they express love? My son, for example, his love language is physical touch. You can discover a child's love language by the time they're 4 years old by observing their behavior. When he was that age, I'd come home from work. He'd run to the door, grab my legs, and climb on me. He's touching me because he wants to be touched. Our daughter never did that. She would say, Daddy, come into my room. I want to show you something. She wanted quality time. She wanted my undivided attention. So observe your behavior and observe other people's behavior. Secondly, what do you request most often? And what do they request most often? You know, if your spouse is saying to you periodically, can we take a walk after dinner? They're asking you for quality time. Or if you're going on a business trip and they say, be sure and bring me a surprise. They're telling you gifts is their language. So what do they request? And then what do they complain about most often? And what do you complain about most often? The complaint reveals the love language. I had a mother say the other day, she said, Gary, my 6-year-old son said to me, we don't ever go to the park anymore since the baby came. He used to have his mother's quality time, undivided attention. Now the baby's here, he's not getting it. He's complaining about it. So if your spouse says, I just feel like we never spend any time together anymore. I just feel like we're ships passing in the night. They're telling you quality time is their language. You put those 3 together, you can pretty well figure out your love language and someone else's love language. But you can also go online and take a free quiz at 5lovelanguages.com, the number 5, 5lovelanguages.com. And my publisher runs that website, and they told me that 110 million people have taken that quiz, which is very encouraging. Because you make some choices and it'll tell you what your primary language is, what your secondary language is, what's the least important to you. And imagine if you both have that information, now you know what's most important to the other person.
I love that. And it's definitely been a useful tool for my family. So definitely both through observation and learning what my husband and kids love and how they want to be loved. And also the survey tool is super helpful as well. So recently, I've always used this and applied it in terms of family and in my marriage. But I was recently talking with a mentor of mine, and I'm guessing 110 million people have taken this survey. A lot of people out there know what their love languages are. And my mentor was saying, he was talking about working with advisory groups and boards and how he always gets to know the love languages of the people he interacts with in his workday. And I had never really thought about it that way, but God calls us, God doesn't say like love your spouse and love your family. God calls us to love our neighbor who doesn't even live in our own house, right?
Right.
So I was like, well, it makes sense. Love languages, I've always applied it in my home, but I really should be applying this to loving my neighbor. And so he keeps an Excel spreadsheet of all of his board members and all these different people in his life and how they want to be loved. And then he tries to keep track of expressing how much he loves them. So yeah. I'd love to hear from you. You're the expert on this. How do we learn to love others in the language that speaks most effectively to them in spaces like a work environment where in a marriage you want to be loved back? Yeah. In a work environment, we don't know if we're going to be loved back. It's not necessarily a reciprocal thing. How would you go about maybe, loving your secretary, loving your, people in your church and your colleagues well?
Well, actually, I wrote a book a few years ago on that topic. It's called The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. We use the word appreciation rather than love, but it's the same concept. It's how do you communicate to your coworkers or in any business situation that you value them as a person. They're not just a cog in the machine, but you value them as a person and you appreciate what they do. I wrote it with Dr. Paul White, who's a psychologist, who incidentally is also a graduate of Wheaton College. And we teamed up with it. In fact, I tell him, I said, the reason I teamed up with you is because you graduated from Wheaton. So I figured I could trust you,
Pretty safe bet, right? Good things come out of Wheaton.
We've had tremendous response to that book. Because what we found, here's what motivated me to join him in this. 70% of the people who have a job in this country say they feel little to no appreciation coming from the people with whom they work. And I think it's 64% of the people that leave a job and go to another job say they left primarily because they didn't feel appreciated where they work. So with that book, we have a free code with every book, and that code will give you what we call the MBA inventory, Motivating by Appreciation Inventory. And that inventory tells you on a given person, what their primary appreciation language is, what their secondary is, and what their least important is. Now, you can take the quiz. That quiz is not free. You can buy blocks of quizzes. And the reason it's not free is because he's a businessman, and businessmen want to make money. Mine is run by my publisher, and they want to make money too. I told them when they told me 110 people had taken that free quiz, I said, you should have been charging $1 a piece. And they said, no, we just want people to get the idea, But at any rate, we're having tremendous response with that. And he did 2 years of research, or 2 or 3 years maybe, before we wrote that book. He would go into a business and give a job satisfaction test, and then he would share this concept and have all of them take the quiz, and then they would share the results with people that they worked with, and he would challenge them to start expressing appreciation in the most meaningful way to that person. And he would go back then in a year and give another job satisfaction test, and in every case it was statistically improved. We've been very, very encouraged with the impact this is making in the business world.
That's fantastic. I love that. And I wrote it down, and I'll be utilizing that too. I'll pay the price. Don't worry.
Well, the first one's free. If you buy the book, you get one free.
Oh, see, there we go. I like a bargain. So in your new book, Love is a Choice, there's a compilation of stories that show the 5 love languages in action. And these stories illustrate ways we can choose to love people where it would be easier to ignore somebody. We all know that, that moment in life, or walk away from a relationship. And this is a little different in the workplace, right? Because it's not an environment that you can necessarily walk away. you can moderately ignore your colleagues from time to time. But choosing to operate with an intentional love may not just be helpful to those involved, but may create a more productive and effective work environment. So can you think of a story or one of the stories that you've heard over the years that illustrates the ways that we can choose to love somebody when it's really hard to love them, and it would be easier to maybe ignore them when possible?
Yeah, there was a manager when we were doing some research on this in the workplace who shared the story with us, and she said, my assistant just wasn't getting the job done, and I was very frustrated. And I'd go home at night and complain to my husband about, how she just wasn't getting the job done. And he said to me, and she said, I told him one night, I'm just going to fire her. And he said, well, before you fire her, why don't you sit down and talk with her and see what's going on in her life? So maybe there's some things going on in her life that are causing her not to be effective. So she did. And she found out that the lady had a teenage son who was strung out on drugs. And she had no idea what to do. And she was just so disturbed. And it was just possessing her, with anxiety. And so when she shared that with her manager said to her, well, let's get him some help, And so she set up and helped her find a treatment center and helped her with expenses on the treatment center. And then, once the kid was in the center and hope was on the way, she became a different person at work, and they went on to become really, really close friends, and the son eventually came out and was doing fine. But she said, I hate to think what would have happened if I would just have fired her because I wasn't satisfied with what she was doing. So, taking time to find out what's behind a person's behavior if they're not getting the job done before you take a step, that you may regret later. So that's a good example. Yeah.
That is really good advice, and something I think sometimes, the world gives us the easy out, which is, okay, you need a performance improvement plan, or maybe I need to fire you. And really, God's heart is like a second chances or understanding how we can really help the person to achieve what they're, I think wanting to do if they took the job, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most people would like to do a good job, where they are, and it's sometimes things get in the way of that. Sometimes things at home, sometimes things at the workplace where, they rub each other the wrong way. They just kind of don't like, and things. And so, and there are toxic workplaces, let's admit that, there are toxic workplaces, but, if you're in a toxic workplace, are you going to let that affect you? So you're going to just join in with what's toxic and you're going to become toxic yourself? Or are you going to ask God, what might I do in this situation that have some potential for making things better? And talking with people, having conversations with people is always a positive step. You never know where it's going to go. But if we just ignore people and just think, I can't have anything to do with them because da, 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 da. But if we have conversations with them, we get to know them as a person. And the very fact that we're taking time to have a conversation with them and eventually asking questions not only about workplace, but other things in life and showing real interest in them, we sometimes build friendships with people that we beforehand thought, I could never be close to them, So a lot of potential when we take time to reach out to people. I think love begins with the concept of being courteous. And that word courteous comes from two Greek words. One means the mind and the other means friend. So it's to be friendly minded. So what if we try to treat the people that we encounter at work as though they were a friend, or treat them as we would treat them if they were our friend? And so we start treating them that way, and that has a positive impact on them. It touches them emotionally and opens up the possibility that we might even develop a friendship.
Yeah, I love this. And we've probably all had a point in our careers and in our lives where we've worked in a toxic space. And I've even found that I think you can love by example too. When you're in a toxic work environment, when you love people and people see you taking the time to love others well, there's a desire in them to do the right thing sometimes. And you can shift. I really think you can shift a culture by, I think I would call it loving by example, that other people will want to love people well when you do.
Yeah, I think we influence people by our model, often more than by our words.
Yeah.
And exactly what you said. If we in a toxic workplace situation, if we have a positive attitude, and we identify with what, if they're giving us something of their frustration, we can say, yeah, I can see how you'd feel that way. Here's what I try to do, and then we share, kind of what we see, what our perspective is on things, because we don't want to let other people control our well-being. And we can have a positive outlook and look for positive things rather than focusing on the negative things. And sometimes they may get a little hope. Well, maybe that's what I need to do. So yeah. The model is powerful.
It absolutely is. It's interesting that I'm talking to you today. I have a couple friends, really close friends, who have really hard boss relationships. Yeah. And I honestly say, like, my boss does not like me. They don't love me. I don't even think they like me. And so, in a workplace where we can't walk away, unless you quit your job, which I guess, that's an extreme way of walking away. You talk about how painful memories cause us to pull back from expressing love. So what is your advice, and how would you advise somebody to choose to love somebody when they are unkind, or when painful memories seem to dictate our emotional behavior? Emotion, you said earlier, is part of that love. What's your advice to overcoming that, and maybe loving up, loving your boss, or loving down, loving somebody who's painful to work with and emotionally hurtful?
Well, I think, the scriptures say, and Jesus actually said, love your enemies.
Yeah.
If you think your boss is your enemy, you got the word from God. Love your enemies. So I think we have to start with that. That with the help, God loved us while we were sinners, the Bible says, and sent Christ to die for us. So I think we choose an attitude of love. And sometimes with a boss that you're not getting along with, or you think is down on you, to simply, if you have a chance to interface with them, sometimes you don't, but if you do, to say, I've been really thinking a lot about my performance here on the team, and I really think I can do a lot more than I'm doing, and I'd just like to ask you for your advice on how I can make things better in my little part of the world here in our workplace. Whoa. Well, most guys or gals who are in places of leadership will have an idea of something you can do. And then you say, I really appreciate that, and I am going to work on that, because I want to give my best to our team here. See, sometimes when we go in that way, rather than being critical of them because they don't ever give us any affirming words, or they say negative things about us and all of that, if we don't deny our feelings, that we're hurt, or even angry or whatever. We don't deny that, but we don't let our feelings control our behavior. We're choosing an attitude of love and then behavior that expresses love, in spite of the fact that we have those kind of feelings. So, there are other things, but that's one idea of how to try to begin a better relationship with a supervisor.
I think this is great. This is really good advice. And in going to them in that humble posture of saying, what can I do? Yeah. It definitely is disarming to people, because it's not confrontational. It's like, hey, how can I be a blessing? Right. And I think God blesses that posture. And as I'm thinking about this, it wasn't uncomfortable, but it was a different mindset for me to shift the love languages from a marriage and a parent context to a work context. And sometimes it feels maybe, at work, we need to love people as we love neighbor outside our comfort zone. And that can be a challenge to some of us, and you're like, man, I don't feel like I would naturally love that individual.
Right.
So how do we overcome the fear of being God's agent to enrich and to love somebody that maybe we would typically avoid? So looking beyond someone's job description and seeing them as a fellow human being, as an image bearer of God. What are some ways, I think you talk about, there's an early chapter in one of your books about a simple cup of cheer. Okay. And what are some ways that you've kind of talked about, loving people that you never thought about loving before?
Yeah, well, I think that book that we're talking about on Love is a Choice, and these individual stories, because these stories come from all walks of life, and the one you just mentioned is a very simple thing. This family was going on vacation to Carlsbad Cavern, And they were so looking forward to hiking, together as a family. And they get there, and the ranger says, I really hate to tell you, but the park is closed because the snow, it's just too dangerous to let you in. And the guy had his window down, and he was hearing what the guy in front of him said to the rangers when the ranger told that. And he said, oh, it's not snow's not that bad, and da. So when this guy gets up there, he says to the park rangers, well, thank you for looking out for us. I really appreciate that. And I know it's cold out there and it's hard on you guys, but thanks for looking out for us. He gave him a positive word, a word of affirmation. Then he went back to the restaurant with his family. While they were sitting there, he said, why don't we get some coffee and take it back up there and give it to those guys? So he did. He got out of his car, gave the coffee to him. So it felt for you, it's so cold, we just want to give you some coffee. He said the smile on those rangers' face was much more satisfying than taking a hike. So if we have an attitude of love and we're thinking about how could I enrich the life of the other person, we will come up with ideas, on how to do that with an individual person. I think the whole thing also of loving somebody that you just would not normally love, like even cross-culturally. Sometimes we just we're kind of halfway friendly to somebody. We speak to them, but we don't try to build a relationship with them. They're not like us, we say, but we're all made in God's image, and every person we encounter is important to God. And if they have problems and they're kind of cantankerous and not very friendly to you, it's probably because they're hurting inside. It's coming out that way. So if we can just keep that in our mind and recognize that we are instruments of God in whatever context we are in. And so if we ask God to show us the opportunities that are there and give us ideas on how to do it, I think that's a prayer God will answer.
I love that. Yeah. It's such a great picture of how our paths cross, so many different people with so many different people, right? Every day. Yeah. And so we're gifted so many opportunities to love people. And it's such a great expression of the gospel. It's been hard, I would say, over the last, 4-5 years, maybe more, to have really healthy conversations sometimes in workplaces. And there's, been a lot of really harsh dialogue. And what are some of the things that maybe you've seen, or some of the tactics that you've seen that help us to be good listeners to the views and the feelings of others? And you say it's an act of love, right? So how do we choose to listen well and to love people as an act of showing love?
Well, we are not by nature listeners. By nature, we want to get our point across. Mm-hmm. In today's world, in which we have got so many diverse and divisive attitudes in almost everything, if we spend our energy trying to convince the other person that they need to believe and do what we think they ought to do, we're just going to have a battle. And we have a lot of word battles going on today, online and otherwise. And those kind of battles destroy, they don't build. But if we take time to listen to someone and ask questions, even if they disagree with us totally on whatever the topic is, we say, I'm really interested on knowing your thoughts on this. And once they share your thoughts and how you came to that, what led you to that thought, that position or that attitude. And they sense that we're interested in hearing their thoughts and understanding, their ideas and their feelings and so forth. It opens up the door for the possibility that they may ask you, well, why do you feel the way you feel? And so dialogue or that kind of communication really is the road to having better relationships. But if we're just going to try to convince them they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, or they shouldn't have the attitudes or the positions they hold on this, that, or the other thing, then all we're doing is just what everybody else is doing. We're just fighting. We're just trying to, shoot your ideas down, and you ought to be doing what I'm doing. Doesn't lead anywhere positive. And I don't know. I hope we could rediscover that in our country.
Yeah, me too. And I think words of affirmation is a great start. right? If we think about affirming words, it definitely opens up our dialogue and the words we're saying in a much more loving way. So, Dr. Chapman, I just want to personally say thank you. Thank you for your work. Thank you for taking notes all those years and for reflecting and writing. I know that your book has been powerful in my life, and I'm really grateful for it. And I'm excited for, anyone listening to really think through not just how do they love the people inside their house, but how do they love people outside of their house when they go to work every day. And the chapter, the story you shared about the ranger and the cup of cheer, I love it because we have opportunities to express love using multiple love languages, right? In the words of affirmation and the cup of coffee, right? And it gets us thinking about, okay, if I'm called to love God and love people, how do I activate this and do it well? And I just really appreciate the tools you've given us. Any last minute thoughts that you might have before we close?
Yeah, I think I would just encourage those who are listening to think along these lines, because by nature, we all get pressured by our culture. And it's so easy just to go along with the cultural way of it, which is right now, kind of a civil war with each other, as it were, and ask ourselves, is this really how I want to invest my life? Or would I rather invest my life trying to hear people with whom I disagree and find out where they're coming from and let them know that I care about them? If there's anything I can ever do to help them, I want to do that. And then looking for things in them that you can compliment. I mean, you can disagree on 99 things, but if there's one thing that you can compliment them for, then use that. So I think we have to rethink, and each of us have to ask our own selves is, what has been my attitude? Do I have a loving attitude toward people, outside my family? And am I looking for opportunities to express, that? I was sitting in the airport just yesterday, and there was a young man and his father. He was 11 years old, I found out. He was dressed rather sharp, And I said, I just want to say this to you. You are a very sharp-looking young man. And my prediction is that as you get older, you're going to have a positive influence on the world. And he said, thank you. And looked over at his father. I said, are you his father? He said, yes. And I said, what do you do? He said, I'm a lawyer. And he said, this is my son. He said, this is the first day I took him to court to watch me, And man, well, I didn't have to do that. But if you're thinking in terms of how can I enrich people's lives, that young man may remember that along the way. That the time in that airport that guy said to me, in the future, you're going to make a positive impact on the world. You never know, because words are powerful.
Absolutely. And when we love people, it makes them feel loved, and it makes them more capable to express love, and it creates that contagious love effect. I love that. Yeah. See, now I'm using love interchangeably. I do also love hot dogs and ice cream and my husband. Dr. Chapman, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I really appreciate your work, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Hannah. It was good chatting with you, and keep up the good work you're doing.
All right. Thank you. I will.